Welcome to the third and concluding part of the 2020 East Bay Leadership Series. My name is Ken Mintz, and I am proud to be the chair of the board for East Bay Leadership Council this year. We're in for an engaging, timely, and thoughtful discussion this afternoon about racial justice at work. My involvement with the East Bay Leadership Council, the East Bay's premier employer advocacy organization, goes back decades because my employer, AT&T, recognizes the value of employers collaborating on important policy decisions at the regional, state, and federal level. Despite the partisan rancor in Washington, D.C., EBLC works day in and day out on a nonpartisan basis to improve economic vitality and quality of life here in Contra Costa and Alameda counties. EBLC is grateful to our members and to our event sponsors. I'd like to recognize our sponsors for their vital support, particularly during the challenges presented by COVID-19 pandemic. EBLC is fortunate to have three major sponsors this afternoon: CSAA Insurance, Chevron, and Martinez Refinery Company. I want to thank the three outstanding EBLC board members representing our major sponsors: Danielle Kagan of CSAA, Lindsay Crane of Chevron, and Anna Notangelo of the Martinez Refinery Company for their positive impact on EBLC's work. The 2020 Leadership Series is so fortunate to have four sustaining sponsors as well: St. Mary's College, John Muir Health, Kaiser Permanente, and Marathon Petroleum. Contributing sponsors for the series are listed on the slide and include CEMEX, Contra Costa Association of Realtors, Contra Costa Water District, IBEW, Local 302, Lennar, Miller Star Regalia, Oakland Athletics, Phillips 66, Safeway, Wells Fargo, WISPA, and the Workforce Development Board of Contra Costa County. In addition to all the organizations that sponsor this event, the council created an opportunity for its board members to be community leader sponsors. They're listed on the screen here, and I will quickly read their names: Keith Archuleta, Jody Avina, Jim Brandt, Angie Coffey, Linus Uckel, Leroy Morishita, James Paxson, Anne-Marie Taylor, Jim Trupiano, and Peggy White. I look forward to the day when we can all be in the same room together, but until then, please know how much your continued sponsorship of EBLC events means to our work. We simply could not do this without your contributions. With that, I will turn it back to EBLC's President and CEO, Kristin Connelly. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. As Ken mentioned, I am Kristin Connelly. I have the good fortune of being the president and CEO of the East Bay Leadership Council. Before I do my own welcome, I want to start making it a practice that EPLC acknowledges the unceded native land on which we are located. We're all joining this event virtually using servers and technical equipment from different places. I'm zooming in on Ohlone and Yokuts land, and EBLC's headquarters in Walnut Creek is on Miwok land. I want to echo Ken's gratitude to our sponsors. These are challenging times for many of our member companies and their employees on an unprecedented, extraordinary scale, and we're grateful for their continued engagement. Our major sponsors today are committed to this topic, racial justice at work, in different ways. You'll hear more of this from their panelists in a bit, but CSAA Insurance has been on a journey toward correcting racial disparities in their systems and processes and is being honored at our Philanthropy Awards, which I'll tell you about in a minute. This summer, Chevron joined nearly 36 Fortune 100 companies in releasing their diversity report filed with the federal government in a commitment to transparency. That's new. And here at the local level, the Martinez Refining Company has recently relaunched their Workplace Diversity Council. And as one of their engineers puts it, we shape the culture that we want to work in. Like so many organizations, EBLC is committed to our own journey of addressing racial disparities. Thanks both to the culmination of Vic's leadership during his tenure as board chair and the leadership of our new VP for Leadership Development, Danielle Kagan, also of CSAA, EBLC has developed a racial justice framework to guide our work. We intend for this to help guide our work both internally in terms of our own hiring practices and procedures to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion, but also externally through our events like the one being sponsored today. For example, the changes we implemented to the Philanthropy Award selection criteria reflect our commitment to the principles in the framework. We also will use the racial justice framework to inform our policy work on behalf of our members and in support of our mission to improve economic vitality and quality of life. Following a discussion of the new framework with our board of directors last month, I was so gratified that the board's feedback was to make it even more explicit that EBLC aspires to be an anti-racist institution in everything we do. Today's program is the culmination of the 2020 East Bay Leadership Series, which started with our 34th annual East Bay USA dinner on January 30th, featuring a keynote presentation by the US editor of The Economist, Vijay Vaitswaran. I have spoken with many of you in attendance today about how East Bay USA was the last large work event you attended in person before our region started to feel the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. Part 2 of our series was on May 28th, our first major virtual event, a moderated Q&A session with Connor Doherty of the New York Times about his best-selling book, Golden Gates, Fighting for Housing in America, a page-turner about the housing crisis in California, including a historical account of the disparate impacts of zoning laws on racial minorities in the state. A recording of this event is available for EBLC members, and you can contact me if you're interested in obtaining a copy of Connor's book, which features an entire chapter about the decades-long battle to build 315 apartments on the site of a former quarry in my tiny suburb of Lafayette. Before I pass the program to Vic to get today's program started, I want to do 4 quick things. First, I want to thank Mark Orcutt, EBLC's communications director, for making today's event possible and for doing all the heavy lifting with our virtual events. We could not do this without Mark's brilliance and his attention to detail. Second, I want to encourage you all to plan to participate on Thursday, November 12th at 9 a.m. in our 10th annual Philanthropy Awards. Our theme this year is Giving in Uncertain Times, the Courage to Do Things Differently. I strongly encourage you to attend the event. It's the single most uplifting day on the EBLC calendar. Third, I want to mention EBLC's ongoing policy work. Under the leadership of EBLC's policy director, Lindy Lavender, we successfully launched a new pilot structure, which consolidated our policy work into 3 task forces that meet monthly: infrastructure, opportunity, and water and environment. Be sure to check out our task force calendar on the website, eastbayleadershipcouncil.com. I want to promote our upcoming infrastructure task force meeting featuring a discussion with Therese McMillan, the executive director of the Metropolitan Transportation Commission on Housing and Equity, on November 9th. This meeting is being co-sponsored by our friends and colleagues at East Bay EDA and Innovation Tri-Valley Leadership Group. Finally, I want to say a word about the format for today. When Vic opens it up to Q&A, please use the Q&A function in Zoom, which can be accessed at the bottom of your screen. Vic will have a chance to review your submissions and will do his level best to ask your questions as time permits. With those 4 things accomplished, it's now my pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Vic Baker. Vic is EBLC's immediate past chair and is senior manager of PG&E's Diablo division, where he's been a senior leader for the past 6 years. Prior to his tenure at PG&E, Vic worked for San Diego Gas and Electric for 8 years, where he worked as both innovation and ideas manager, as well as supplier diversity program manager. Vic also has nearly a decade of experience as a construction engineer. Vic earned both a Bachelor of Science in Civil Environmental Engineering and his MBA from San Diego State University. The challenges of COVID-19 have not stopped Vic from completing his doctorate in education from the University of San Francisco in 2020. I would be remiss if I didn't also mention that Vic's commitment to DEI work and the EBLC is featured as part of an interview in this month's Diablo magazine. Bottom line, we are in great hands today with our moderator. And without further ado, I will gladly turn today's program over to Vic Baker.
Thank you, Kristin and EBLC. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for investing your time with us this Tuesday afternoon. My name is Vic Baker, and I'm the moderator for today's East Bay Leadership Council Leadership Series on Diversity. So today, we have an amazing panel on racial justice at work, where we will be talking about the systematic diversity, equity, and inclusion gaps companies continue to struggle with. Our goal today is whatever your role is, that you will come away with something where there's empathy, better understanding, a fresh perspective, a new strategy that you can apply to be more successful in moving the needle to a more equitable and harmonious workplace. So here's the format to give an idea of what to expect for today. I will take a few minutes to introduce each panelist. I will kick off the conversation, asking questions that draw out some of the high-level themes and trends we should be thinking about. And then the second half of our time today will open up the floor to give you an opportunity to ask specific questions to help navigate the upcoming opportunities and challenges to be more successful in your job today in managing diversity at your workplace. How does that sound? Sound good? Great. So let's get started. We have a phenomenal panel today, and I just want to make sure I get their introductions correct. So first up, we have Lybra S. Clemons, recognized by Black Enterprise as one of the top corporate women in diversity. Lybra is a seasoned C-suite executive with over 15 years of human resources, talent, and diversity and inclusion experience across a variety of Fortune 500 companies. Currently, Lybra serves as Twilio's first Chief Diversity Officer. Reporting directly to the CEO, Lybra sits on the executive team and is responsible for building and scaling all global diversity initiatives. Prior to Twilio, Lybra was the global head of diversity at PayPal. She has also held key roles in diversity and inclusion at Morgan Stanley, the Brunswick Group, and American Express, where she has garnered experience in Europe, Africa, and Central America. Lybra holds a BA in political science from Spelman College, a master's of public administration from Columbia University, and an executive management certificate from Dartmouth. So join me in welcoming Lybra. Next to Lybra, we have Esayas Wureta, a near 20-year vet in diversity and inclusion. Esayas currently serves as Manager of Inclusion and Belonging at CSAA Insurance Group, which is a AAA insurer. Esayas leads the creation, development, and execution of the company's diversity, inclusion, and belonging strategy aligned across 4 pillars. Those are workforce, workplace, communities, marketplace, and members. The company has been recognized for its diversity efforts by numerous national organizations, including the Human Rights Campaign and the National Association of Female Executives, and was named one of the 50 most community-minded companies in the United States by Points of Light. Prior to joining CSAA Insurance Group, Esayas led the development, delivery, and evaluation of intercultural competence, diversity, and inclusion events at Peace Corps, 65 countries, including training for more than 100 recruiters in 8 locations. Esayas received his BA in International Studies from Frostburg State University in Maryland, a master's degree in International Development and Social Change from Clark University in Massachusetts. So join me in welcoming Esayas Wureta. And last but not least, Mr. Jonathan Mays, Esquire. Jonathan Mays is Senior Vice President and Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for Albertsons Companies. Safeway's merger with Albertsons in 2015 made Albertsons one of the largest grocery and pharmacy chains. And it operates nearly 2,300 stores under 20 different banners in 34 states and DC. The company employs 300,000 individuals. Jonathan joined Safeway in 1994, where he held a number of senior level positions in government relations, public affairs, sustainability, philanthropy, and diversity and inclusion. He is a certified diversity executive, a keynote speaker, facilitator, consultant, and frequent presenter at national conferences in major universities across the US. Jonathan received a Bachelor's of Science degree from Warner Pacific College in Portland, Oregon, and a Juris Doctorate from Willamette University College of Law in Salem, Oregon. So join me in welcoming Mr. Jonathan Mays, Esquire. Okay. So let's jump into it. First question, I'm going to leave this one for the panel. So first question, each of you are leaders in your respective organizations. You have a seat at the table. So what does that table look like for one in your company with respect to race and gender? And what is your message to leadership while you're sitting at that table? Lybra?
Yeah, so currently my seat at the table is at the executive level. I report to the CEO and I sit in and participate and I'm part of the executive team, which is pretty game changing. Most companies, their diversity officer kind of reports into someone that reports into someone else, or maybe they report into the head of HR. And I actually am an advocate of this role, and it's dual. But I really do report to the CEO, like it's a proper dual role, because I don't think you can inform a lot of the changes that you're going to, or any impact if you are not sitting within the people team, or if you don't have any connection or a line connected to or the head of HR. So what that looks like, oddly enough, we dialed into the executive meeting call. I've only been working at Twilio for about 6 weeks. And we dialed into the call and we realized in the executive team, we actually have more women than men, which is pretty much like, that's not normal. There's also a Black woman who is our CEO's chief of staff. And the chief of staff is a very, very role at Twilio. So we started on the same day. Since we're all on Zoom, we dialed into our executive team meeting and we literally had a color purple moment where we were like, oh my God, you're on the team too. So what it looks like, it feels really good. One of the things I will say in short is that it's so nice to have another Black woman that's part of this network with me, that I can have a conversation with, that I can run ideas by, that I'm like, am I crazy? So that actually, and kudos to Twilio, but also it's just, to me, I feel really good and very, very supported all around.
Well, thank you for that. And, being there for 6 or so weeks, you probably don't have a structure at this particular moment because it's only been 6 weeks, but what are your thoughts on gauging the buy-in and acceptance, and maybe how do you plan on holding your counterparts accountable for diversity and equity?
Yeah, so 2 things. One, I have been there for 6 weeks, but I've been in this space for so long. When you know, and for those who are on the panel, when you're in this space, you know how this rolls. You know what you need to do. You know how to organize it and structure it. I will give Twilio again a lot of credit. One is before me, they had an amazing head of diversity, but she left the role over a year ago. And so one of the things I will say is that Twilio elevated this role to report into the CEO after hearing feedback from the former head of diversity. That to me is progress. 2 is, I started 6 weeks ago. So I didn't start in the middle of COVID, and I didn't start after George Floyd. What this company and executive team did was to sit down and create a strategy, and they committed to being an anti-racist company. They came out publicly and they set the goals and the agenda. I don't own that, they do.
Good. And
so what I am stepping into is a lot of diversity work that's kind of all over the place with all the right intentions and really good work, but I'm kind of bringing it together and streamlining it. I feel so lucky to have walked in and, to a lot of celebrated wins. I can't take any credit for it. Right. So the accountability is still there because the work was there before I started. I don't at all feel like people are dumping things on me. One of Twilio's values is to be an owner, and that's for everything. And so I own my work, but people own their work. They own their diversity strategy for their respective teams and so forth. So, I'm planning this beautiful picture, but it is, it is walking into a situation where there's a lot of work being done, streamlining it, pulling it together, adding a bit of expertise, making it global, and making sure people remain accountable to it. That it's not my job to do every single thing. This is the business. This is the executive team's job, as well as everyone's job as owners.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's the space I'm playing in right now.
Which is great because it looks like you guys are already moving the needle with respect to what you're doing in diversity, and you're coming into a place where you already recognize some opportunities. And so I commend you on that. And that is the growth from season to season, and how can we get better at diversity and not just be stale at diversity. So commend you and Twilio for doing that. And what that says, so I want to ask Esayas about employment discrimination overall. So employment discrimination has remained unlawful since 1964's Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, right? And yet there's a need for explicit corporate leadership on diversity. So Esayas, what do you believe is your purpose and role as the lead corporate diversity officer in your company? And how much of that role is spent on compliance matters, keeping us out of trouble, as compared to working on achieving actual equity in the company?
For me, compliance is important. But when we're focusing on compliance, there might be an indication, particularly compliance being attached to laws that are already in place, it might be a signal that you might be a little bit behind in terms of what needs to happen to create a space of inclusion in the workplace. And so that's just one thought that's out there for me. And something that I really try to pay attention to in terms of what is needed, what needs to happen to really take this work to the next step, right? Particularly in where I'm situated now at CSAA, compliance is something that I have a hands on, but more or less on a consultative level in terms of what needs to happen to really move the threshold beyond what we're expected to do to really live up to our core values around inclusion. And so what that looks like for me is really making this work a conversation, but a conversation that's rooted in knowing what the systemic barriers are in our organization, how they manifest themselves, and making sure that the individuals who own these systems are really putting on that critical lens and identifying how this system is connected to our lack of representation in certain places, and really being in a space where they're able to problem solve in a way that centers everyone, right? But particularly centers on the identities that we're missing out on. Because at the end of the day, it does have a business implication in terms of our ability to really deliver the best product and the best experience to our members. And so for me, compliance is important. And I also really do believe in that separation of compliance and this work, because for me, this work is in many levels a conversation to move on to a space that we are still imagining. We have a desire, we know how we want to be in that space. We kind of have an idea of how that space feels, but we're still coming to terms with what it looks like and what needs to happen to get us there.
So moving away from compliance as a norm now versus us pushing toward compliance, and now we're moving and the threshold to more of an equitable workplace and more of a conversation. I love that. So thank you. As African Americans, though, you knew early on that you were Black. You knew early on about the hurdles, and you're able to prepare for those hurdles and navigate those hurdles to get to the levels that each of you are, right? So Jonathan, describe some of those hurdles and how you were able to successfully navigate them, and how do you engage younger people of color who are not readily aware of maybe their obstacles at this moment?
First of all, Vic, thank you for that question, and good afternoon, everyone. I want to tell you just a really quick story I will never forget, but it responds to what Vic is talking about. Mm-hmm. It was very early in my career, my first job after college, and I was fortunate to move up in the ranks and become a manager at this Fortune 100 company. Mm-hmm. And I had decided that I was going to leave that company and go to law school. And I'll never forget my last day at work. The branch manager called me into his office. He closed the door. I sat down and he said, "Jonathan, I just want to tell you, you are the hardest working, most dedicated, most articulate Black person I've ever worked with in my entire life.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to laugh out loud on that one, Jonathan, but I think we've all heard that before, right? We've all heard they put the Black in front of it.
And what do you do with that? And it just taught me early on that, unfortunately, a lot of people were not going to just view me as Jonathan. They're going to view me as Black guy. His name is Jonathan. And there's really a belief among many in the community of color that you sometimes have to work twice as hard to go half as far. And I wish that were not the reality, but all too often in too many places, that is the case. And so what we do as people who try to move up in the company and who are people of color is we do the best we can to navigate the system as effectively as we possibly can, knowing that unfortunately there are people like my former branch manager who, despite our best efforts, are going to just see color first, or in the case of women, they'll see gender first, or in the case of sexual orientation, and they see that first, and not what's going on in terms of that person and their ability to do the job well. Yeah. And so let's just keep it real here. It is harder. I've been fortunate to give a presentation that's called My Top 10 Recommendations for Career Success. And I especially feel honored to give that talk, and I've given it many times to a number of different groups, to folks who are early in their career. And it's an hour-long talk. I'm not going to take the time now. Of course, we don't have it. But a couple of things I recommend early on to people early in their career who are trying to move up. And I'll just mention a couple, maybe 3 things in terms of advice. One, there's a great book called Who's Got Your Back? And the idea behind that book, and it's a concept that we often know of, but we don't always employ. And it's a concept of selecting your own personal board of directors, not family members, not buddies necessarily, but people you respect, who can advise you or further down the road, who you go to for advice about your career, advice about who you are, who you present it as at work, but people who you give the green light to be really transparent and honest. And so my first bit of advice that I give to people is take a bit of humility here, realize that you are best served by getting wise counsel from other people, and elect your own, get your own personal board of directors. Second thing I say is be really intentional about your brand. That is what you want people to say about you when you're not in the room. And do the best you can to be intentional about defining who it is you want to be and what it is you want your brand to be. And then getting advice from your board or personal board or others to really manage your career so that your brand is what you want your brand to be, and to use your best efforts to do that. Third thing I would say, and again, it's 10, but I'll just stop at 3. Third thing I'll say is to be really intentional about your network. And by that, I mean really being intentional about connecting with people who potentially can help you move up in your organization or at other organizations. The last 2 jobs I've gotten 100% because of my network, where somebody reached out to me and said, hey, Jonathan, there's a position I think you'd be really good for. Would you please come talk to us about it? Mm-hmm. And so I can't overstate the importance of being intentional about having a good network. Not that you always are looking to get something from someone else, but also so that you can also help others who might be interested in coming to work wherever you are or learning about an opportunity that you know about.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. Those are nuggets of knowledge. And I'm glad we're recording this because there are plenty of young people who can really garner some great advice from you, Jonathan. So thank you. But I'm curious, and this is for Esayas. Esayas, talk to us about your experience identifying as Black only after moving to the United States.
Yeah, so I'm ethnically Eritrean. I was born in Sudan and then migrated here to the US. And as I shared with Vic at a previous engagement, it was in the context of Sudan as an Eritrean. I did not have to identify as Black. Black was new to my vocabulary. And I didn't have to identify as Black because I was in a majority Black space, right? So whiteness wasn't there for me to be Black. I was my language group, I was my religion, particularly being in a Muslim majority country. I was many things, but Black was not one of those things that I had as my identity. Then we migrate to the United States. And fortunately, I say fortunately, because Washington, D.C., the whole area is a vibrant Black community that is unparalleled. Sorry, I live in Oakland, love Oakland, but there's something there for me in terms of the Black representation. And so through migration to the US, I started to identify as Black. And I started to identify as Black here because Blackness, or race as a whole, is a huge part of our nation's formation and just the narrative and identities that make up this country. Mm-hmm. I became Black not immediately when I first came here. I would try to go hang out with the white kids, and there was some socialization there. They were like, oh no, you're supposed to go hang out with the Black kids. And then I would go hang out with the Black kids, and the Black kids in this case were mostly African-American kids. And I would easily become the African booty scratcher, especially if you are a child of the 90s, which was just a thing, right? And then I would go to the kids who were newly arrived immigrants. In this case, there was a lot of Vietnamese and Latin Americans in my community. And there I would experience some connectivity of being new to this country, that anti-Blackness and colorism would very much seep in.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
And over time, I started to identify as Black because all the systems that I was engaging with, everyone who I was engaging with was telling me that I was Black. And that identity became really important in naming my experiences because it was one that was shared with African Americans. And I say that also knowing that there is a difference between an African who migrated here. There was a part of me that wanted to say at choice, by choice, but I wasn't, right? In that it is the same coin around white supremacy that names and pushes me to identify as Black. And that also forced me in some ways to move to the United States, right? Because Eritrea was an Italian colony. After the war, there was a huge back and forth. Does Eritrea become independent? No, it goes into Ethiopia, and then the war starts that forced my migration. And all of this is connected to colonialization, which goes back into African Americans being brought here, or Africans being enslaved in the United States. And so interestingly enough, I would describe it as a different side of the same coin. And it was my migration to the US that really formed, that caused me to identify as a Black person. Whereas before you would say, hey, you're Black. Like who, where? I'm brown. What is this? And it was the only way for me to really reckon with all the things that I was experiencing, things that I did not have a name for and didn't need a name for in the context of Sudan and in the context of being in a predominantly Black nation.
Right. So thank you for sharing. And what I found was an interesting takeaway from what you just said was your Blackness was identified through the systems that exist here in the United States that help you understand that you're Black. And while we have a constituents of people who are learning the word systematic racism for the first time, may disagree or not disagree with it, but at least they're talking about it, right? At least it's on their lips and they're talking about it. That's the positive in this. Well, before it was ignored. And a large part is due to the unrest that we're experiencing, the heightened unrest that we're experiencing. For us and the people of color is nothing new. It's new to others who hadn't had that experience, right? So in this current climate, and with respect to race and diversity, how has that altered how you show up at work and how you approach your work? And I'll open that question up to Lybra.
Trying to get off mute. It doesn't. I mean, I think that I've always been Black. I've always been a woman, and so it doesn't alter. What it has done, especially, living and working in New York for years, especially in banking, I've been very, very aware, but it has allowed me to navigate with purpose and intention. And so I don't know that I've changed like my outer appearance at all. I never had a question around my hair. I wear braids. My hair is natural. It's always pulled back because I work out all the time. But and my clothing is my style. So I'm not sure that I felt like I had to change all of that. There's an idea of this code switching. Perhaps I do it. I think we all do it just because that's how we grew up. But I've also been in a role that is predominantly Black and predominantly women. And I've been in this space for a very long time. Before it was actually a thing in the early 2000s, I was working in diversity. And so people that were in this role that are in HR, that are doing recruiting, especially in New York, were Black. So my Blackness was realized. I was very cognizant of it. I've also, worked in spaces where I wasn't the only one. And there were always people that were more senior than me, where I could rely on them. And to Jonathan's point, they were my mentors, they were my sponsors. And so I was able to rely on them for that. Fast forward to 2020, the entire world is now aware of Blackness, of true Blackness, however we want to define it, whether we're from this country or not. And the whole world is aware of equity or inequity and racial justice. Well, they're aware. Whether they choose to do anything is another thing, but there is awareness and there's a heightened sensitivity around it. And these roles and diversity roles even more prominent. Everybody all of a sudden is working in diversity, and so, and most of us, 90% of us are Black. And so it is an unapologetically Black. It's almost like they want that. So I think that I'm not sure I'm answering your question. Have I always been aware? Yes. Have I always gone out of my way at the very least to try to find people that look like me and to work near people like me so they can have a shared experience, because you need that community of people around you? Absolutely. Does it get hard? Yes. Has it been hard? Absolutely. Have there things that have happened at work on a regular basis where I was like, if I were white, this would not be happening? 100%. Those things happen outside work as well. I don't care if I'm living in California, or New York, or Paris. Worse over there. Like, you know what I mean? So I think that, but I am very aware of it. I'm also very cognizant of where I lend my expertise and my time. So one of the questions in the chat was like, why did I choose a certain company? Why did I choose a PayPal or Morgan Stanley and so forth? And I'll tell you the story of PayPal. I lived in New York for 20 years. I'm not in my 20s. So to disrupt my entire life and move across country when I'm very much an East Coast person is a big deal. And before I even considered working at PayPal, I went on their website and I needed to see how many Black people were listed as their senior leaders on the website. At the time, there were 3 Black women that were senior leaders at PayPal. One was the head of HR, who would have been my boss. The other one, it was co-heads of HR. There were 2 Black women, and the general counsel was Black. And I was like, yes, this is worth the move, because I knew that I would be connected with a number of Black women that were going to surround me and support me. The same thing with Twilio. Like, I knew that there was a commitment to being anti-racist. It's one thing to say it, but when I noticed the commitment to elevating this role and to hiring Black women, they have their first Black CIO as a Black woman at Twilio. I don't think any other tech company has a Black woman at that level in the engineering space at Twilio. And so for me, that was really important. So finding that connection and that support and finding that camaraderie from other Black people, male or female, was really important for me. And so how I showed up, I just felt like I was in a space where I could exhale a little bit and be myself and continue to be myself and know that I have that support network.
Excellent. And that's genius. And you have a uniqueness of your intersectionality that Crenshaw talks about. And not only do you have the the issues you have to deal with just being a woman in a workplace and at the C-suite level as a woman, but also as an African American, and to find other African Americans, you can see that there has been some advancements there to put to ensure that we acknowledge those African Americans for their expertise, and that hadn't always been the case, right?
Especially in tech. I mean, let me just be clear. A woman in tech is one thing. A Black person in tech is another thing. A Black woman in tech at the C-suite level, probably on one hand. And so that I think is pretty phenomenal. Probably two hands. I'm gonna add a few people on there, but that's pretty amazing. You know, that's pretty, amazing and profound. So you're right. There's a lot of intersectionality around that for sure.
Right. So thank you for that. We let's take a step back a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about and this, Jonathan, I'm going to address you on this question. When we talk about how the civil rights movement got started, we look at the young Black college students. These are 16, 17, 18, 19-year-old kids who are really pushing this narrative and pushing this movement, sitting at the counters, marching down the street, getting attacked by dogs and water hoses to push the Civil Rights Act that they were able to achieve in 1964. How would you describe African-American advances in corporate America, similar to what Lybra was saying in the last 50 years? But more importantly, how would you describe, because the civil rights movement was not just for African-Americans, although the African-Americans really sacrificed, there were, it was open to equal rights for anyone, right? For everyone. So our LGBTQ plus community, our several communities that were disadvantaged. So I'm eager to hear from you. How would you describe the advances of other disenfranchised groups in corporate America in relation to African Americans, right?
Yeah. So I wish I could give companies a passing grade in terms of how they have embraced diversity overall over the course of the last 50 years or so. When I think about Fortune 500 companies in America, I believe there are about 5 companies that have Black CEOs of the Fortune 500 companies. When you look across corporate America at the senior VP level, the executive level, you're looking at percentages that are approaching 2 to 3% or so last I checked, despite the fact that African Americans, Blacks make up approximately 13% of the population. So to say that Blacks are underrepresented in corporate America is a supreme understatement, to say the very least. But I am gonna be optimistic that the future will be better than the past. There's a saying from James Baldwin that is one of my favorite quotes these days. And it says, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced.
Right.
So in light of all of what's been going on with the George Floyd murder and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and Garner and all these others, people are beginning to really understand, there really is a serious problem here. People really are not being treated fairly for no other reason than how they appear. But not only that, and Lybra mentioned it, it's not enough to say, isn't that a shame? But people more and more are beginning to understand that for there to be meaningful change, we have to stop doing what we've been doing and to do different things. And so she mentioned not being, that it's important to be an anti-racist, not just saying it's a problem, but to be actively involved in changing it. And so for those of you who are interested, I mean, there's so much literature out today. There's a well-known book called Be Anti-Racist by Dr. Kendi. There's another book that came out around the same time, How to Be an Anti-Racist by Dr. Kendi. A book that many of you know about called White Fragility, which if you haven't read, I also recommend. I could go on. I'll just stop there. You get the point. But there's just so much literature out there to raise awareness so that we can have these courageous conversations to say, If we keep doing what we've been doing, we're going to keep getting what we've been getting, and what we've been getting has not been very good. So fundamentally, are we serious about change or not?
Right.
And if we're serious about change, we've got to rethink how we do things going forward.
And do it.
And act on it. And then act on it. There's a quote, another quote that I have recently heard and I've been sharing with some folks. And it goes like this. It's from Anthony Robbins, the self-help guru. The first half of it is from Anthony Robbins. And it goes like this. Things will get better when we get better. We collectively, as a society, when we get better.
Right.
But there's another part of it that comes from a diversity and inclusion professional. And it says, and for pardon the grammar, but it goes on to say, and we will get better. We collectively, we culture, we American society, we will get better collectively, our organizations, we will get better when me gets better. The person you see in the mirror. And so it's incumbent upon each of us to fundamentally look at ourselves and to say, what are we, not we, what am I going to do personally, beginning today, to be an anti-racist, to be more welcoming, to be more inclusive, to be more open-minded, to be more cognizant of the reality of bias and the fact that I need to combat it on an active and daily basis. And so we get better, things get better when we get better, but we doesn't get better until we individually get better.
And that is extremely important statement you make, because the reality is that most organizations being representing nearly 2%, it's not 2%, I don't believe, it's nearly 2% of the executive decision makers at companies, we're not empowered necessarily make a change that are going to reflect on African Americans within corporations. And so one of the questions I hear from one of our attendees is, how do we create a better workplace? How do we engage non-Black employees or non-white employees and Black employees to work together and encourage their own participation? And, you know, one of my comments is, until the people in power can make the decision to want to make us work, we're not going to make it work because we're not in a place to do it, right? And so we have to convince our allies, and I think that's the term that has come up in the last 6 months and 8 months, is the term allies. We need allies. We need people there in power who can make decisions, who can say, yes, I'm going to do this, and yes, I'm going to make a change, and no, I don't care what other people think about me when I do this, and I'm going to get pressure. It's going to hurt, but consider the people who actually push this narrative. Consider the fact that they hurt too when they pushed this law into existence in '64. And so, you know, one of the things we're doing is, if you're asking what you can do, is buck the system and do the right thing. So thank you for that, sharing that experience, Jonathan. And the books are great. I've read all three. They're wonderful. So thank you for talking about those. So let's talk a little bit about hiring and promotion amongst that. So when we talk about 2%, many companies, you can look on their websites and they will brandish all the awards and diversity awards, and we're a great diverse place to work for, and all these grandiose things. And you look at the numbers and you say to yourself, you may have numbers, but the numbers lie at the very low end of the totem pole when we look at the population and the power that exists with those numbers. So where they within the organization, not just that they exist at the organization, matters as well. And that's where the word equity comes from, right? It's not a matter of just getting them in the door. So Esayas, you know, you belong to a large organization with plenty of resources and opportunity for equitable hiring and promotion. So what types of advice can you give our small, medium-sized businesses? They're our largest employers, right? So about how to start to improve their own diversity initiatives at their small to medium-owned businesses.
One of the biggest, I guess, recommendations I would give anyone is really to just start to have the conversation. However way you want to have a conversation, because there's a lot of areas that you can go into, right? You can go into representation if that's the focus that you want to have. You can go into how the folks that you do have represented in your workplace, how they're feeling. And I think it's important to really focus on all of them, but start to have the conversation and start to acknowledge, hey, we have differences, and those differences are impacting who's at the table, who is in this space, whether it's virtual or a physical space, and how we're engaging in it. And I think really starting there and moving in a way that brings people along in the conversation can be really, really useful. One of the things that's been really important for us this year, started out this year really wanting to be explicit around race, right? Because it is one of those conversations where we as a country and as a people tend to not really go into, right? It's always like, oh, okay, let's not go into that conversation. Let's not have that conversation, but it's a conversation that we need to have. And so for us, what that looked like, to your point, Vic, is that you can really paint a beautiful picture around diversity in a lot of organizations. But when you do that double click and look into, okay, you have people of color represented at 42%, who constitutes the people of color? What is the experience of Black folks in that number, in that consolidation? And what is that experience across the hierarchy in the organization, across different intersectional identities? Naming things is really powerful, because not only does it tell you where you can go, it tells you what's happening. And oftentimes we can go into a space of solutioning without having a great appreciation of what we're solutioning for, of what our current situation is. So start to have the conversation, name the context that you're in, name the challenges that you have, and solve for them in a way that names how your organization, you as an individual and you as an organization is situated in a country that has a very strong race history. And one that overvalues, right, certain ways of being and undervalues other. And so it shouldn't be a surprise that it is in your system. It's baked in your system. It's baked into your organization. It's baked in every organization that there is. And so really knowing that, appreciating that, naming how it shows up in your organization is a great place to start. And from there, there's so many possibilities of how you can go.
So Esayas, so my question then is for you and maybe even Lybra, who does the naming of the organization? Who brings that up? Is it that administrative assistant who's sitting on a master's degree who's consistently being overlooked for opportunities? Or is it somebody from your diversity office who can actually come in and have that conversation? Who has that conversation, and how are people empowered to do that? How do they do that?
I can start us off, and Lybra, please do jump right in. I would say it's everyone, right? Everyone, first of all, is already speaking, is already saying stuff. Are you listening? Because chances are folks are naming their experiences, but the folks who might have the power aren't always listening. So really being in a place where you are listening is really important. And I say that because, to your point, everyone has an opportunity to name what's happening and what might be potential ways forward. I'm also a firm believer that this kind of labor oftentimes is pushed to folks who are vocalizing what their experiences are, but aren't necessarily being compensated and rewarded for that extra task, because it is not exclusively their job to do that. So I think it's really important to manage that, where you're incorporating all voices, because we all have different experiences. I myself, as Esayas, with all the intersectional identities that I have, I can't speak for every Black folk, right? Like, we're not a monolith. And so there's going to be other ideas, other experiences that need to be heard. And I also recognize that I am positioned to address these issues. And so it does start with me, as much as it is a part of everyone's jobs as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that there are a couple things. One is, I had a conversation yesterday with someone that is on our employee experience team, and he started off Black man as an executive assistant. And so there's a bit of chicken or egg. Is the environment so that you feel like if you want to move up, you can raise your hand and feel so empowered to actually do that? Go to the right people, say, hey, you know what? I'm this, I'm that, I'm looking for, you have a plan, and then someone, it's usually your HR business partner, can help you navigate through that. So it's creating these spaces where people feel comfortable enough where they can figure out how to navigate through the system. The second part of it is, there's accountability on HR, the people team, and your diversity person to be a bit more proactive. And part of our jobs is to actually ensure that there is opportunities for those who aspire to get to that next level. And so we're creating in that space for all. But for those who have been typically marginalized, it's a little bit harder for them. And so we have to be a bit more proactive and say, hey, you know, I'm looking at this list of people who are starting at the beginning or junior level folks who have potential and who are top talent, and thinking about asking, number one, there's a lot of assumption that everybody wants to move up. That is not true. Some people are like, I'm good. Like, just pay me. I'm good. I got family. I got all this other stuff. I'm good. I want to start my own business. That's great. But there are those people who really want to move up or want a stretch assignment. And so I think there's a bit of the role of your manager, number one, your HR business partner, and your diversity person really owning your talent career and you own your talent career. Together, you are charting out a plan to kind of move to that next level. I mean, my recommendation always to any person of color or whatever, however you want to define it, is you have to advocate for yourself. Nobody's going to give you anything until you ask for it. And I didn't learn that for a while. But if you ask, you never know. Like what they say, closed mouth, no food or something, you know, like I think that you've got to advocate for yourself. And so there are those systems that a company is supposed to create, these systems that make it a little bit easier for people to feel like someone cares about my career, someone cares about my development, someone wants me to actually advance. And so what do I need to do in order to do that?
Right. Yeah, closed mouths don't get fed. So I agree completely. You know, express how you feel, express that you want to move up. But we also are dealing with leadership who has a view of who we are or who we're not. I mean, and I can go back to '99 with Texaco and the black jelly beans. I can talk about just this year, a few months ago, a well-known financial organization whose CEO said that they're not qualified pool of resources to pull from in the Black community. How do you respond to CEOs who are coming out and given their particular attitude around what they feel is the position of African Americans within the workplace? And that's for anybody.
I'm gonna give that to Jonathan.
That's all right.
Well, first of all, when you hear a question, or pardon me, when you hear a statement like you just mentioned, Vic, and I'm familiar with the statement of the company, when you hear a statement like that, it's a gut punch.
Man, yes.
And you think, and then you shake your head from side to side.
Yes.
And then you feel sad because this is a powerful person who should know better.
Yes.
But unfortunately, he's saying what he thinks, which means he doesn't know better. Because the reality is that talent is out there. You just maybe need to open your eyes more broadly than you have in the past.
Right.
I mean, the old, again, this old saying, if you keep doing what you're doing, you keep getting what you're getting. Maybe, I don't know, you need to look in different places for talent. There was a shout out earlier for Spelman, historically Black college and university. I mean, that's just one that's in a chain of organizations that provide every year talent. Mm-hmm. It's a talent making machine. Mm-hmm. And so again, when you hear that, my first response is sadness. Mm-hmm. My second response from sadness, though, is to remind him of the reality that companies that truly embrace diversity and inclusion generally outperform those that do not. We know that, but we don't always do that. Right. And so just to point that out to him, and that if his goal is to be as successful as his company can possibly be, presumably that's his goal. If he really means that, then he has to also be a person who embraces diversity and inclusion, because research shows, from McKinsey and others, that with regard to women, you're 21% more likely to outperform your peers if you're in the top group, top quadrant for diversity, as opposed to those at the bottom. For diversity in general, you're 33% more likely to outperform your peers if you lean into diversity and inclusion with your management ranks than if you don't. I mean, we know the facts. And so if you're serious about your company being the best this can possibly be, you have to be serious about diversity and inclusion in word and also in deed.
All right. So one of the, it's interesting you say that when we talk about qualifications, one thing I was taught very early on in my career was never give an opportunity for people to dismiss you. So I've worked on my education and continue to work on my education to make sure I have the paperwork, the lambskin, that you can't just dismiss me. I qualify for every job that exists in the company. That's one. So I'm eager to understand what drives you guys with higher education. When we talk about your experience in pursuing higher education, how does that play as a key role in your success? And would you recommend people to pursue higher education, just pursue the career path? What would you recommend? And we can start off with Esayas.
I think the biggest gift that my education has provided me, outside of just access to a new socioeconomic condition, new job opportunities, all of those things, which is real, is that my education provided me with a language to name my experiences, which is a game changer. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes when you don't have the vocabulary or really just that historical lens to frame your experiences in, it's easy to make it an individual experience. It's easy to have some shame around some of the things that you're experiencing, but knowing that and having the language to name microaggression when it's happening, right? To have language around some of the systemic barriers that you're experiencing, I think puts you at choice of knowing that this is happening, and really brings back the power to you in terms of how do I want to be, how do I want to navigate this, and how do I want to be at choice in this situation. So for me, that was one of the biggest gifts in education, is providing me the language to name my day-to-day experiences in a way that leaves me at choice and brings me back into my own power.
Okay. Thank you for that. I appreciate that, because you do have a unique intersectionality with respect to coming to this country and have to find, I guess, who do you identify with, right? and how people identify you, because I think that's probably the larger drivers, people identifying you versus who you identify with. Let's talk a little bit. I'm looking through some of the questions here, and I'm going to check off some of the questions. So one of the questions for Jonathan about Safeway and Albertsons. One of our respondents indicates that he goes to a local Safeway and they have several black clerks and baggers. What program does Albertsons or Safeway have to train clerks for advancement to assistant manager and manager positions?
So the reference was made a few minutes ago. I think it was Lybra, who basically says you need to voice what you want. Mm-hmm. And so currently, if folks want to move up, they have an opportunity to voice it. And then we have development programs for folks who want to be department managers, assistant store directors, and also store director training. But it really largely begins, frankly, with raising your hand, and if you don't want it, if you want the role, pardon me. But we also don't just leave it there. We certainly encourage our store directors and our department managers, when they see someone who has maybe not raised their hand, but who they believe has ability to go far beyond where they are professionally, to proactively reach out to them and say, what are your thoughts about, and then fill in the blank for the role. And so it can work in two directions. And so that's what we have now. Could we do more? Yes, but that's what we are doing currently. And it's been the result of a lot of folks being able to move up in the organization where perhaps they might not otherwise, but for that resource.
So then how do you, for somebody who's coming into this organization and may be a leader, there's an element of, do I belong because I'm the only one in the room all the time? So unlike you, Lybra, growing up in California, we're always the only one. It's just, I would love to be in DC or in Atlanta or something like that, where I can look around the table and just see a few of us and feel that comfort, but we're always the only one here in a lot of places and spaces in California. And so I dealt with my own personal issue of imposter syndrome. So I sit in there, and for those who don't know, imposter syndrome is the feeling of being kind of insufficient. I sit on 3-4 degrees. I have plenty of experience. I was put at the table because I definitely know what I'm talking about, but yet I feel inadequate just sitting in a room. Like I shouldn't talk. So how do you respond to somebody like myself who are sitting in this position, sitting in that room and having a voice and actually being able to offer that voice with some bite around that voice? When I say bite, I mean with some influence, I should say, from your peers. Let me put a caveat around that, because there is always this stigma that we got hired because we're Black. That's the stigma. So Lybra, Jonathan, Esayas, anyone? Yeah.
So I don't care. And I also like,
Say that again,
I don't
please.
care. Like, I don't care because there are people that get hired because they're white.
Right.
I also know plenty of white people who have imposter syndrome, more than you think. 90% of the people that are acting and dancing and singing have imposter syndrome. So it is not for Black people. We experience it all the time. And because of what is happening in our lives and because we're conditioned to think that way, we're always thinking we're the only ones. Everybody sitting at that table has that. And it's, and I applaud those leaders and CEOs and just leaders of universities who are very open and honest about it. I mean, it's a thing. It is a thing. It is not a thing plaguing Black people, but it is a thing. So every time you think that you're like, oh my God, I don't belong there, everybody else sitting around that table have that in the back of their mind. I mean, there's so much arrogance in someone who doesn't even question it at least once, and even then that freaks me out, because where's that arrogance coming from?
Mm-hmm.
So I say that now because I'm like feeling a little bit liberated, because I am kind of at the top, and I just got here, and God knows I could not be here tomorrow. I don't know, but and especially in this role, there's tons of people running around saying that like, you got this role and you're sitting in the C-suite because of diversity and because of what you do, because of, and toe to toe, bring on somebody else that's been doing this as much as I can and who can really impact change. You know what I mean? I think what I do and what I contribute to a company from a branding perspective, just driving business results, to me is the same as someone else that's doing something very different that's a little bit more technical. And so it is something I've had to fight all the time. I remember at my last company, there were times when I just walked into a room and I felt so incredibly small and I felt insignificant. And there were things that were said that I was like, am I just supposed to be here? And I would have to walk out and in the back of my mind think, everybody's thinking that about themselves at some point. And the ones who are speaking the loudest, the ones who are offending you the most, are the ones that are the most insecure. And I'm not one to manipulate other people's insecurities, because I'm about abundance. I'm not about scarcity. But I also had to think about all the things that I've done and contributed. And I believe in God, and I believe that I'm here at a moment for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And so no one else can judge that. And listen, it took 47 years for me to get there. So I'm not super woke and super all together, but I have to go back to feeling like I'm in the place I'm supposed to be right now. That's it. I'm here right now. And so, but I also know that as a human being, we all are questioning. We're all wondering if we're doing the right things, if we're parenting right, if we're being good kids, are we, being good people, are we not littering? We're always having this imposter syndrome. So don't just think it's just us and our people. It does impact us differently, but just know that everybody else is struggling with that.
And I appreciate that. And that is I have one more question to ask before I turn it over to Kristin to close this out. But I want to first say how thankful I am to bring this kind of talent to one particular place to talk about it. I mean, to have C-suite really spotlight what we're doing in diversity and inclusion right here in the local East Bay is tremendous. And then we also give people an opportunity to know that we have leaders who actually want to do something and are doing something. So thank you guys for joining us today. I want to give a shout out and say thank you very, very much. And my last question, Real simple, there's no right or wrong answer about this, but my last question as we approach Thanksgiving, before I turn it over to Kristin, is real simple. Pumpkin or sweet potato?
Sweet potato, hands down.
What?
Pumpkin or sweet potato?
I don't, whatever. Sweet potato.
I have an open mind. I'm inclusive. I welcome both.
Oh, look at that,
Me
Jonathan.
too.
Look
I'm
at
with
that.
you
I
on
love
that
it.
one.
I love it. He's like, I eat sweets. Bring them on. With that said, thank you guys again. So Kristin, I'm going to turn it over to you to close us out.
Great. Thank you so much to Lybra, Esayas, and Jonathan. We're so grateful for your time and your talent and talking about all of these issues on which you have so much expertise. This is exactly the program that we needed. So thank you very much and wish you continued success in your careers. And thank you for giving us so much to think about. And so I particularly like Lybra's comments about imposter syndrome and just, so much of what is encountered in the workplace. So I thought that was a great way to wrap up. Just a couple things. Wanted to just encourage you all to check out our 10th Annual Philanthropy Awards on Thursday, November 12th. We have a terrific slate of honorees doing really incredible work for our community. You can find details on our website. And also just wanted to, again, thank our sponsors for their support of the 2020 series. Sponsorships are available for the 2021 series. We are likely going to be gathered for East Bay USA's 35th anniversary dinner, because we'll still be virtual, on the 21st of January. Yes, the day after the inauguration. So we're planning in earnest for all of that. But today is we're celebration of moderation. Contra Costa and Alameda counties are now moderate in the blueprint for reopening the California economy. And I just want to, it's so important for our economic recovery to stay on a healthy and good path. Unfortunately, too many states are struggling. So we are continuing our work through our Contra Costa Economic Partnership to help lead an equitable economic recovery in Contra Costa. Invite you to join and support that work. But really just hope that as you finish the rest of the year, that you stay safe, keep yourselves healthy, and enjoy those that are in your bubble, whatever that looks like. I look forward to being in the room where I could properly bestow on our panelists appropriate thank you gifts and other things, and to thank everyone in the room. So with that, we are adjourned. Thank you so much.
Take care, everyone. Have a good one.